again, try to follow me to the best of your ability. This is not a neuroscience profound class. I'm just trying to, as succinctly as possible, to explain the process behind this. Now, if you see this EEG, we have high amplitude brainwaves. Look at these brainwaves here. They're very high in amplitude, which means they're slow. If we take 1 second to count them, we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Between this line and this line, we have 1 second, and we count the peaks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which means we have 6 cycles per second, or a 6 hertz brainwave. Now here you have faster brainwaves because they're smaller, and look how fast they go. So this is high amplitude, low frequency brainwaves, and this is fast amplitude, fast frequency, low amplitude brainwaves. So let's talk about perfusion, which is another important element. And perfusion has to do with blood flow to the brain, and blood flow to the brain has to do with functioning. If you have hypoperfusion or a reduction in blood flow to the brain, we have problems. If you have hyperperfusion or excess blood flow to the brain, we have problems. What we seek then, it's a balance, and we call that neutral positive perfusion, okay? And perfusion, it's related to the frequency of the brainwaves. So in a nutshell, to not confuse you a lot more, when we have from 0 to 4, which is your delta brainwaves, we have hyperperfusion, okay? Between this line and this line here, we have positive neutral perfusion, or the ideal perfusion to the brain. So delta brainwaves correlate with hyperperfusion, too much blood flow. And delta brainwaves can be related to the trauma response. We also have hyperperfusion when we have between beta brainwaves and gamma brainwaves, when we go from about 13 all the way to 40 hertz. So excessive gamma brainwaves and excessive beta brainwaves are about hyperperfusion. And when we are about between 12 and 16 hertz, which is SMR brainwaves, sensory motor rhythm brainwaves, we have neutral positive perfusion. Now you may be asking, well, that might be interesting, but what does it have to do with brain spotting? Well, my hypothesis is that when we are doing resourcing or we're doing deep processing with brain spotting, we're actually fostering neutral positive perfusion. So we're bringing down the theta rhythm, we are bringing down the beta and excess gamma rhythm, and we're getting the brain into an alpha SMR rhythm, which means a neutral state for the brain, okay? So I ask all of those out there who are not necessarily into neuroscience to support the work of Mario and I, and Jane in Canada, and Damir in Germany or the Netherlands. You know, really support what we're doing, because this is very important. What we're trying to do is to passionately find out what the mechanisms are. And one of my ideas is that neutral positive perfusion is fostered through brain spotting. Now, we have yet to see that because we have to do long-term EEG recordings, but that's one of the things we're going to do, and that's one of the things we're going to start working with Mario in Spain and others around the world. Now, it's also important to understand nesting and coupling, because this is how the brain transfers and transports information. Nesting and coupling are the processes that allow us to think and feel and understand things. If I say what's 1 + 1, you're gonna go, oh, that's 2. That happens because of nesting and coupling. And it has to do with brain processing speed, which again can be affected by the trauma response, okay? So to understand that, we need to understand that the slow brain waves, delta, theta, and alpha, are carrier waves or transport waves. So they're gonna carry or transport something. okay? And the fast frequencies, beta and gamma, are your content and information waves. So in order for our brains to process information the right way, we need a slow brain wave, which is the transport or carrier wave, and we need a fast brain wave to nestle or couple to it. Hence the name nesting and coupling. So the fast brain wave, which is your information wave, is going to nest or couple to the slow brain wave, and the slow brain wave is going to transport to another part of the brain. Without it, we do not process information. My other theory, and I strongly believe this takes place, is that trauma will affect nesting and coupling, because our trauma clients are more often than not cognitively impacted in a negative way. Their memory, their sensory processing, their empathy gets affected, and that has to do with nesting and coupling, okay? So this is a paper that I can share with you too, because it's a healer and healy paper. And what this is showing is the brain pattern of a healer and the brain pattern of a healee. So we have a therapist and we have a client. And at first, if you notice in the darker gray line, labeled A, we have the brain activity of the healer and the brain activity of the healee, and they're out of phase, meaning the brain of the healer and the brain of the healee are not synchronized. They're in different frequencies. But after a few seconds of attunement, and this is where the dual attunement frame becomes important, relevant. After a few seconds of attunement, the brain of the healer and the brain of the healee synchronize, okay? And I'm not making this up. This is published research. This is published evidence. My theory is that the dual attunement frame that Brainspotting so beautifully provides helps this process. So one area of research we're interested in is connecting the therapist to an EEG machine and the client to an EEG machine, and reading the brainwave activity at the same time. See what happens. I believe the brains get synchronized. I believe we will see the same process. If we get to prove this time and again, we cannot be refuted. We're going to be able to prove that Brainspotting is a very powerful methodology. It's not a placebo. It's not new age. It's not Quakery. There's a science behind it, okay? And I love Brainspotting. I strongly believe in Brainspotting, and that's why I'm so adamant about studying this. Now, this is a very important slide because it will help us understand the process of nesting and coupling. These are three individuals. I'm not going to spend too much time here. There's three individuals. One is a normal individual. This is an ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, high performance individual. So in spite of the fact that he has ADHD, he performs well. He can do well. And at the bottom, we have an ADHD low performance individual. Somebody with ADHD who is struggling, who is not doing too well. All right. So what we're measuring is they have a go, no go task. Basically, what we're doing is we have them click the mouse if they see a red dot. The instruction is once you see a red dot in the middle of the screen, click on the mouse as fast as you can. And that's the task. Go, no go. The top individual, we have the slow brain waves, which are his theta brain waves represented in blue. Same for the other two individuals. And we have the information brain waves, which are gamma in red and beta in the yellow. All right. Now, what we're measuring is how much nesting and how much coupling there is. So meaning how many slow brain waves are transporting fast brain waves. In the normal individual, there's a lot of red and a lot of yellow, which means when that client sees the red dot, they're going to click fast because their brain is processing things in a way in which we want it to process things. And it takes this individual only 620 milliseconds to do that. Now, for the individual with the ADHD high performance, there is a lot less red and a lot less yellow. So his nesting and his coupling are not the same way as the normal individual, meaning this brain is struggling to process information, and it takes him 756 milliseconds, 136 milliseconds slower than the normal individual to press the button once they see the red dot on the screen. And for the ADHD low performance, there's even much less red and much less yellow. And it takes them almost a second to click the button. Now, you may think, well, a second is not too much, but in terms of brain processing speed, it is an eternity. We are supposed to respond in 500 milliseconds or less. So taking twice as long, it's very problematic. Now, while this is ADHD, I believe that trauma has the same process. Highly traumatized individuals will present with less nesting and less coupling, meaning in layman terms, their brains are operating at a slower pace. And that's significant because if you have a brain that's compromised due to trauma and they're not processing speed in the right way, well, they're going to have problems. They're going to struggle at work. They're going to struggle at school. They're going to struggle with their relationships. They're going to go into addiction, and they're going to, engage in all this unhealthy, self-harming behaviors that can ultimately become lethal to the person. So we also talk about thalamocortical dysrhythmia as a source of brain dysregulation, and I also believe this is strongly related to trauma. Now, the circuit, the structure that allows our subcortical brain and our cortical brain to communicate is the thalamus. So when we're doing brain spotting and we have the person go deep dive, take a deep dive into the subcortical brain to process, we are engaging the thalamus. And this is called the thalamocortical loop because it goes from the subcortical brain to the cortical brain, okay? Now, thalamocortical dysrhythmia occurs when there's a lesion. The thalamus has two inputs and two outputs. Two inputs, two outputs. When you lesion one of the inputs, you're gonna lesion automatically one of the outputs, and your brain has to compensate. This yellow circle represents neuroplasticity. If there's damage in one region of the brain, the rest of the brain is not going to sit there and go, oh, well, tough life, it's what happens. No, the rest of the brain is going to mobilize neurons to compensate for what's happening. So thalamocortical dysrhythmia increases the symptoms of tinnitus. It has to do with the intensity of pain, the intensity of rigidity in Parkinson's disease, the intensity of depression, and I added this up because I believe this is what happens. Thalamocortical dysrhythmias are partly to blame, are partly the culprit in PTSD and the intensity of trauma and PTSD symptoms. That's not to say that all trauma is related or caused or correlated to thalamocortical dysrhythmias, but I believe part of trauma clients will present with thalamocortical dysrhythmias. And we won't know that until we look at their brains. That means that when we look at the brain, we look at the brainwave activity, and we have a better way of understanding this. Now, we can also start brain networks, and again, I can share this paper with you. I don't want to stop too much here, but we have a default mode network, we have a salience network, we have a rumination network, we have a negative effect network, and those are influenced differently in different individuals. So part of my work, if I live long enough to do all of this, it's to understand brain networks and how they relate to trauma. And again, it's just coupling neuroscience to brain spotting and providing more evidence that what we do is meaningful. So different networks can help us understand what modalities might work better for them and what type of intervention from different perspectives might work better for them. Let's look now at some EEGs of trauma victims. This is a female victim of sexual assault, and she has diffuse high beta and diffuse fast alpha. It means it's highly distributed. It's all over the brain. When I say no benzos, is because this person is not taking benzodiazepines as part of the pharmacological regime, because benzodiazepines increase fast brainwaves. So there's no benzos. This is all natural brainwave activity. If you look at the EEG, low amplitude, fast frequency brainwaves. So this is the brainwave pattern of somebody who is hypervigilant. I would start by doing resource brain spotting with this person. I would not risk going into an activation spot. It does not mean that it's forbidden and that you shouldn't, and I should never do activation brain spotting with this brainwave pattern. But in my experience, resourcing works better at first. Sometimes doing activation spots will increase the arousal. So we can exacerbate the problem without meaning to do so. And here are the peaks, yellow peaks, green and light blue means high alpha and high beta, a lot of anxiety. This is the topographies. All this purple here means a lot of the fast activity, and this is the pattern for the hypervigilance. Now, when we look at the subcortical brain, we can see the areas of the, or the networks of the brain that are engaged, and that will help us understand what kind of intervention works better. So when we have your insula and your posterior temporal lobe, which would be right temporal and right posterior temporal lobe, you're engaging the insula, and that's a pattern for depression. But you also have engagement of the anterior cingulate cortex, and that's also a pattern for trauma and PTSD. So the anterior cingulate cortex to your insula, to your posterior right temporal lobe is one of the networks that you see in trauma and PTSD. And this is, again, through thousands and thousands of EEG recordings. This is a different pattern. This is a female, robbed twice at knife point. She had the apartment below her being broken into. The lady who was living in that apartment was alone. She was raped. She was severely bitten. And she got afraid that because she lives alone, that was going to happen to her. And if you see, we have different patterns. We have some beta patterns, which is fast brainwaves for anxiety. But we also have slow brainwaves here. And we also have some lack of alpha rhythm. So this is a female with also a trauma, but look at how different her brain is from the previous one. It's unique. Every brain will process trauma in its own unique way. And we can look at it. There's an asymmetry or an imbalance. This is the left frontal brain, and this is the right frontal brain. There's more alpha in the left frontal cortex as opposed to the right frontal cortex. I mean, there's more alpha here than here. This is the left left frontal lobe. This is the right frontal lobe. More alpha here than here. It's a biomarker or an EEG marker for depression. So this client came consulting for depression, and we further examined and probed for the trauma history. But we can see that there's a specific brainwave pattern for her that we can address, and we can test to see what brain spotting modality might be more useful for her as well. And she has a lot of activation in the cingulate cortex. This is the corpus callosum. This is the dorsal portion of the anterior cingulate, which controls cognitive functioning, so thinking a lot. And this is the ventral portion of the anterior cingulate, which controls affect regulation. So I think too much, therefore I become depressed, cognitive and affective. And again, this is from her EEG recording. And we have this pattern as well of a lady who has mu in the blue rectangle. You can see blue brainwaves, which correlate with dissociation. So this is a lady who has a pattern for dissociation. And we can see that in her brain. Here's the mu in the left sensory motor cortex, which correlates with her dissociation. And we can see clearly the mirror neuron system on the left sensory motor cortex being dysregulated. So we would need to target this mu with a specific brain spotting approach that helps us break it down and then bring the client into the here and now. Because when this client has a lot of mu brainwaves and the mirror neuron system is dysregulated, you also get a dysregulated frontal cortex. Mu rhythm in the EEG, like this, means a dysregulated frontal and prefrontal cortex. Affect regulation is dysregulated. Empathy and sociability are dysregulated, are hindered. And that's what we see in the brainwave patterns. So we can affect that positively with brain spotting. Now, how does this tie into brain spotting? Well, remember brain spotting, the premise or the motto we use in brain spotting is where you look affects how you feel. Meaning, if I look this way, I'm going to be accessing specific subcortical regions. If I look up to the right, I'm going to be accessing different subcortical regions. And by measuring that, our goal is to understand the pathways and the roads from the cortex to the subcortical brain to make, again, brain spotting a more meaningful experience. So we know that brain spotting is a resourcing model and an activation model. And we are going to look at some of the preliminary research that we did with Deb Antinori and Sue Pinko in New York in the US 2 years ago. I'm going to be talking about this in Denver at the Brain Spotting Conference. I'm going to be talking about heart rate variability and brain spotting, and I'm going to be talking about this research in brain spotting. But I want to give you a preview, sneak peek of what we're going to talk about in Denver. So here, as we have an individual, he is a male with trauma, and this is one of the sessions we did with Debbie Antinori. We recorded the EEG as a baseline, meaning this was before the brain spotting, and this is an eyes open recording. The client is sitting there with his eyes open. He's not looking at anything. He's just relaxing, chilling, not doing much. And in the purple square, we see that he has a lot of activation in the frontal cortex, mainly in the anterior cingulate cortex region. Okay, so there's activation, meaning rumination, attentional difficulties, impulse control, etc., etc. All of these elements were part of his trauma and the intervention that Debbie was doing with it. So this is at baseline, and we recorded 10 minutes of the baseline, 10 minutes with the eyes open, not doing anything. And this is what happens when he's in the brain spotting session. So we are recording the EEG live as he's doing brain spotting, and look what happens. See all that high amplitude brainwave activity? It goes away. Now, this is one brain spotting session, but it's promising. This is really exciting. Look at the high amplitude and look how it also goes away. So when he's processing, he's going deep into the subcortical brain. He's processing and this goes away. And I was just taken aback by this because I wasn't expecting it to be so powerful so quickly. So I'm noticing it and I'm making note of it. And look at the scales, the color scales. This is the amplitude again. So high red peaks, high brownish peaks, and high yellow peaks. And this is after. Look at the before, look at the after. There's a reduction in brain activity. And if we look at the maps, look at all the red. So at the top, this is baseline, and this is during brain spotting. Look at all the red going away. in the frontal region. We are disengaging, we're cooling down the amygdala, we're cooling down the anterior cingulate gyrus. Well, we're not doing it. The client is doing it by virtue of his own processing. We're facilitating the process. Debbie was facilitating the process with Brainspotting, and the client went into deep processing, and look what happens. Before, a lot of red, after, not a lot of red, and that's good. And again, before, this is the anterior cingulate cortex region. This would be the nose. This would be the right ear. This would be the left ear. So this is before, and this is after. Greener is better. More yellowish is not good. So this is from being too activated to being in the moment. So we're seeing some preliminary recordings of the power of Brainspotting. And that's what we're going to work with Mario in Spain. Mario at his institute, Aleses, and Psychotherapy and Trauma Institute, they have bought EEG equipment and neurofeedback equipment. And we're really excited because we're going to start doing research with this. So again, the goal is to understand the mechanisms of Brainspotting at the brain level. This is one session of Brainspotting, and while it's not publishable, it's exciting. It's a first step. We got to start somewhere. And we have to remember that Brainspotting, it's a young technique. You know, we're very young, and we therefore have time. But if we don't worry about providing more tangible research, we are not going to be as convincing as I think we could be. I think Brainspotting has gained a lot of track, but we could gain even more momentum if we provide evidence like this. So before and after. And this is again the brain. Look at the brain before, look at all the red, and look at the brain when he's doing Brainspotting. The reduction in red means those brain regions are deep in subcortical processing, and look at what happens. Look at how much better that brain looks. And this is one session of Brainspotting. So we need to do repeated measures, and we need to do more research, but I think we have something really exciting here. Now, these are some psychophysiological measures. This is the sweat response, and this is the group. So these are the average of all the people we did the research with. At baseline, they were at 2 microsiemens, which is, it's okay, it's normal. When they were processing, they went up to 5. After the session, right after the session, they went back to 4, down to 4, and 1 week after follow-up. So this is baseline before the Brainspotting session. This is during the Brainspotting session. This is right after the Brainspotting session, and this is 1 week after the Brainspotting session. So on average for the group, they started at 0.9, and they went down to 1.8 1 week after doing it. So their sympathetic branch was still regulated, disengaged 1 week after follow-up. And again, this is just one small research. It wasn't too controlled, but it's very exciting. And I had the chance to go to David's office across the Hudson into Manhattan, and we shared this with David, and he was really excited about it, and Sue is really excited about it, and Debbie is really excited about it, and I'm certainly really excited about it. And we hope to continue this with Mario and folks all over the place, all over the planet. This is the temperature. If the temperature goes up, it's better. So again, before the Brainspotting session, the average group temperature was 86 degrees. When they were processing, they went up to 87, back to 81.21 after the session, and 1 week after, at 1 week follow-up, they went up to 88 degrees. So they went up 2 degrees, which might not, you know, visually and perceptually might not be a lot, but physiologically, it's quite meaningful. 2 degree gain just by the mere process of processing 1 week after Brainspotting. It's very, very useful. So that was my last slide. I hope you enjoyed it. This is how you can contact me. This is my email address. This is my Facebook page. I also have a personal Facebook, Santiago Brand. My YouTube channel, Santiago Brand. If you go to YouTube and search for my channel, you can subscribe. I have tons of videos in English and Spanish for those of you who are bilingual, talking about brain mapping, talking about brain spotting, talking about different things. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram is Neuro Santiago. So these are different ways you can contact me. With that, I want to say thank you. I know I went over a few minutes, but we have some minutes for questions. No rush. We can take all the time we want. I know it's it's the end of the week and the end of the day for those of you in Indonesia. I appreciate the stamina, the attention, and thank you again. So I would like to answer some questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Santiago. So there are some questions actually.
Great.
A lot of questions. So the first question is a very general questions that we need to confirm. Did we get the copy of the slides or recordings of the session, today's session? That's the question.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to share the presentation with you guys. Yeah, that's fine. I will send you and Ina the PowerPoint presentation and some of the papers, which you can then distribute via email. If you want me to send you the papers or videos, you can email me at the email you're seeing on your screen, and I'd be happy to share the information. You know, this is not anything that I have invented, or I don't have the formula for it, you know, for eternal youth. So information is to be shared. So yes, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, so and also, so this recording can be also watched in Santiago, your YouTube channel later.
Yes, so I know that you guys will upload it to your channel, Brainspotting Indonesia,
yes,
and it will also be uploaded to my channel later on, yes.
Okay, that's the first question. So let's move on. There's a lot of questions since the first time. So based on the first question for Lamia, it's from the earlier of the sessions. Based on your experience, what is the best therapy combination for people suffering from complex PTSD?
It's a very good question. Now, those of you who know my work, or those of you who are going to start following my work, will find out that I'm really big into integration. And to me, there's no one single intervention that it's miraculous and that's everything on its own. And by that, I mean that for complex PTSD, I believe neurofeedback is quite powerful because we have published research that shows it. I think that combining neurofeedback with brain spotting, it's a very useful formula. But I'm also big into exercise and nutrition. Nutrition makes a tremendous difference in the brain. And there's plenty of published research on EEG and brain changes with nutrition. I believe that PTSD clients have such chemical dysregulation that they tend to become more prone to eating carbohydrates, a diet based on junk food and a lot of sugar. And that's not conducive to anything good. That creates more inflammation, and that's just going to make PTSD symptoms even worse. So a healthy diet with a functional medicine practitioner or a functional medicine dietitian, plus neurofeedback, plus brain spotting, plus some psychotherapy, it's the way to go. I don't believe that neurofeedback alone is the way to go. Neurofeedback has limitations. I believe brain spotting has limitations as much as I love it. I believe that psychotherapy has limitations as much as I believe in it. I think a combination of all the above is the way to go. I'm always big in integration. I will always defend and support integrative interventions.
Okay, so let's move to the next question from Claudia. So any relationship between trauma and chronic pain and how brain spotting can help?
There's a very strong relationship between trauma and chronic pain, and specifically chronic pain related to autoimmune disorders. I have a couple of functional medicine doctors that I'm close friends with, and we refer clients back and forth to each other all the time. most of the clients that they refer to me, and mostly females, have come to me because they present with chronic pain and or autoimmune disorders, Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, lupus, gout, you name it. But what's interesting is that 100% of these people have a history of trauma, one or more traumas. So again, the process that you get through brain spotting is very powerful and meaningful, but you need to combine it with the proper medical approach. Autoimmune disorders need the proper medical approach. Supplementation, good diet, exercising. In my experience, I have found that these ladies or this type of client with chronic pain or autoimmune disorders benefit greatly from a lot of inside-outside window. They seem to be going into deeper processing and part spotting. Part spotting, because a lot of them have childhood trauma and there's ego states involved. So part spotting with outside-inside window, plus biofeedback, neurofeedback, plus the right medical approach, I think is a good combination. I would suggest to everybody who's listening to us right now that you look for a functional medicine practitioner in your region, in your neck of the woods, and that you talk to them about what you do with brain spotting, because that dual relationship, that dual approach would be more powerful for your clients. And if there's something I don't have the time to address here because we're tired and we're running out of time, feel free to contact me, email me, message me on Instagram, and I'd be happy to expand even more.
Okay, sure. So this is an interesting question. How to assess in athletes? Because this is from Woro. She has happened to be a sports psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So they have athletes who have injuries and they cannot easily erase their experience.
Yeah. Well, I've had the chance to work with athletes, and in the sports world, the number one fear every athlete has, it's injury. If you were to survey athletes everywhere, and you ask them what the number one fear is, it's that of injury, and more specifically, injuries that could be career ending. I normally, when I work with athletes who have been traumatized because of an injury and have problems renegotiating that kind of trauma, I do two things. I work with the element or elements that were related to the injury in the first place. So for example, I had a football player, soccer player, who had an ACL injury. So his anterior cross ligament in his knee was torn. And it was when he was playing a game. So I took the soccer ball and I did an approach similar to the one David has with Mackie Sasser in the baseball player. And I would use the soccer ball and I would get it close to the knee and I would get the activation point. So as I got the soccer ball closer to the knee, his pain would go up. And we worked in the office. We did some sessions like that, but I also took him to the soccer field. And I asked him to reenact in slow motion the moment in which the injury occurred. And we reenacted that moment over and over and over again. He was wearing his cleats, he was wearing his shin guards, he was dressed as if he was playing a game, and I had the soccer ball. And I was manipulating it in such a way that he was reliving the experience as closely as it could be relived, and we were able to get him to move on. Now, the other part of the intervention was that we worked with physical therapy doing electromyography, which is a type of biofeedback which works with muscle information. So I would take my equipment to the physical therapy office and we would work with him doing some biofeedback alone with the physical therapy, and we would do brain spotting with the physical therapy. So when he was having his knee manipulated and the pain would be great, I would use resourcing spots. And then the physical therapist was able to manipulate with more ease. So with athletes, I recommend you work in the office, you go to the field if possible, and you use the elements that would trigger that activation response. And if you have the ability to do it with physical therapy at the same time, then you have a lot more to gain.
Okay, thank you. So this is an interesting question from Susanna Herman. Well, the question is, could it be that when a client walked into the room and someone do the mapping on the brain, based on all the brainwave, galvanic skin responses, temperature, and others, can one already define whether that person has already a trauma or not? Is it like that?
Yes, but if I understood the question correctly, you could discern certain information about the client and possible trauma history by looking at the psychophysiological and brainwave responses. Yes, you could. You cannot ascertain what type of trauma specifically, but you can tell a person by looking at your patterns. I would assume there's a history of trauma, and more often than not, the client will go yes, or will go, how do you know that? And I will explain that the brain talks and the body talks, and that it doesn't need to be a verbal communication in the strict sense to understand there's something underneath that. So yes, you can. The other thing that we do, and we did with Debbie and Sue, was that while Debbie and Sue were doing the brain spotting, I was in charge of recording EEG activity and psychophysiological activity at the same time. If you have somebody who does neurofeedback or EEG in your neck of the woods and you're interested, you can talk to them and maybe collaborate in that. You can do the brain spotting and they can do the recordings. And that way you have data before, data during the brain spotting, and data that we can use after that. The more data we collect, even if it is informal, the better, because it's gonna help us a lot. And I've been able to discern trauma history from looking at EEG activity and stress profiles. Then that helps me decide whether I want to start with neurofeedback or brain spotting. Sometimes I will start with brain spotting right away. Sometimes I will do neurofeedback first, and then we'll jump into the brain spotting. Because in my experience, not everybody's ready to start brain spotting from the get-go. It's too overwhelming for them. So with neurofeedback and biofeedback, we calm down the nervous system a little bit, and then they can process more efficient. It's a trial and error process, but it's been useful in my experience so far.
Okay, so this is the question. So not all of us here are brain spotter yet. So this is a mixture. So there's a question from, because this is two question is connected. Hi, I'm Fida. This is first time hearing about brain spotting. I don't even know how and what kind of tool you use, but overall it's very interesting. I'd like to know how effective it is as a therapy. Will the client be able to totally heal, or it is temporary? And also from Lintan, how can we make sure that the brain changes happen in the brain spotting session are not just temporary, and can it be made actually to be more permanent? This question is two questions, but connect.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and that's why we're trying to figure out with Mario and his research team in Spain. We have there's Anna, the psychologist who's experienced in research, is in charge of has been tasked with designing the research projects that we're going to elaborate. And one of the things we need to prove is that we need to design a study that will help us show that the changes in the brain occurred due to the brain spotting and that they are permanent. Right now, we don't know. The answer to that is we don't know. We speculate they are because we see the subjective changes in our clients. And our goal is to, again, be able to document it to the point where we have irrefutable, or at least as irrefutable as possible, scientific evidence that brain spotting does work. Now, at this point, brain spotting, as powerful as it is, and I'm not trying to downplay it, it's more anecdotal. We don't have conclusive data, and that's what we need to do. So the answer to that question is we need more research, and that's what Mario and I are going to be working a lot. we know brain spotting works because of the subjective statements from the client. That's the best or the more robust evidence we have now. Now, is it scientific in nature? No. But I can tell you from personal experience, you know, David has brain spotted me himself. I've been brain spotting by Pi Fry and Deb and Sue, and very different styles or very good styles, and they all have worked. So I have been able to, in the last 2 years, process more of my traumas than I was in the past. It's a subjective answer, it's a subjective experience, and I know it may not be too satisfying to the person asking it, but that's what we have now. And that's why we're moving forward with this research. That's why we're combining the technology with the talents of the brain spotters to be able to, in the future, answer those questions more conclusively.
Okay, so there's a question about the galvanic sensitivity GSR. It's from Susanna. I find some children have wettish, moist palm. I have been told that some people has that and it is genetic. Shall we consider that it is a possible symptom of stress or perhaps trauma? And also from Ratna, I think about GSR profile about someone with very long trauma, coping with hyperarousal, or they may be deep, repressed, or not aware about their trauma. Can you explain maybe specific elements in GSR we can look at? So it's kind of, yeah.
Sure. Well, the first thing we need to rule out when we do any kind of recording, whether it's EEG recording or GSR recording, as the question pertains, is that we need to rule out medical conditions. Okay, we need to rule out anything in the brain, such as a brain tumor or a lesion or something that may be causing that brainwave activity. If it is a healthy brain, we know it's a pattern that the person's been carrying for a long time. In GSR, when you have a excessive sweating, normally we need to rule out something called hyperdrosis. And these are people who tend to have more sweat glands than normal, and they tend to sweat more. And there's a surgery for that. So to reduce the hyperdrosis, they go deep into the skin and they remove some of the sweat glands, and that solves the problem. If that's when we need to rule out anything medical. Now, once we know that there's no medical causes, you will have two phenomena with GSR and trauma. You either will have an excessive sweating response, meaning the client's sympathetic arousal is extremely high, and we need to focus on that sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, or you will have clients who are not going to react. You could have clients who are highly traumatized. You stress them, or you do your best to stress them, and the galvanic skin response flatlines, okay? Those are normally the clients who tend to dissociate and have severe PTSD, or could have DID, some kind of dissociative personality disorder. So if the client is reacting and it's sweating too much, in a way is good in that we're getting reactivity from that client, and we know that we can break that with the reprocessing more easily, or it's not going to be as challenging for the most part. But if you have a client with low GSR which doesn't respond, it's very tough, because those are the clients who are highly dissociated, probably have some kind of personality disorder that goes along with that. And if you're working with a personality disorder, it's very, very tough, because personality disorders are very tough to crack. I tend not to touch personality disorders if I detect them, because there's very little response, and they can become a nightmare. You know, in their minds, we are the abnormal ones, or we're the healthy ones. In their minds, you know, they're okay, and the rest of us are the crazy ones. So if I detect personality disorders, I personally don't work with them. I know there's people who like them, but you need to assess severe PTSD or dissociation when you have a GSR that is not responding, because it's going to make your work a lot harder. And that's the point where brain spotting becomes very useful, because brain spotting is a very good tool to break dissociation. So you can do heart rate variability biofeedback, You can do brain spotting. You can do some GSR biofeedback. And again, you need to engage psychotherapy. You need to engage pharmacology if required, if needed. And you also need to engage nutrition. I do not work with a client who does not do integrative work. If the client refuses to do the nutritional side of things, I don't work with them. If the client refuses to get into an exercise program, I don't work with them. Because I want to ensure that we're doing the best that we can and we're working hard to get the client better. But there needs to be collaboration from the client for them to get better. And if they don't collaborate, it doesn't matter how much we want it as professionals. Sometimes it's not going to work out.
Okay, so second question, what's the best way to assess GSR?
For those of you who are interested, you don't have to start with very expensive equipment. I have expensive equipment because it's state of the art, is what I love to do, and it works well for me. But there are GSR systems for home use or for the novice practitioner who that run between $100 and $200. And again, if you send me an email, I'll be happy to direct you to those places where you can purchase those. Normally, it's sensors that have Velcros that are wrapped around the tip of the fingertip, or that you place on the palm of the hand. I usually recommend the palm of the hand because this is one of the places where we have the most sweat glands, the highest number of sweat glands, and the readings are more reliable from here. And again, $100 to $200, not very expensive, and you can start working with that.
Nice. So here's also the question. There are questions about the tools. Actually, someone asked about how do you work with the HRV biofeedback when you're doing telehealth? Is it possible to do that?
It is possible. There's different ways. One, you can ask the client to purchase affordable equipment, again, $90, $100. They can also lease more advanced equipment. They work with a company who distributes the equipment, and they do a lease arrangement for a month or two. They can pay in advance or do monthly installments. And I can work with TeamViewer or any other system that allows me to manipulate the client screen. And so I teach them how to place the sensors and do that, and then we can work. The other way is that the client can download specific apps they can find on the App Store or the Play Store, and we can train with those as well. It's almost as simple as doing a BSP online. You don't need too much, and HRV is one of those techniques that you don't need to invest a lot of money on to be effective.
Okay, so two last question. Have you experimented with BSP using the Muse headband for doing EEG readings?
No, right? I know about the Muse, but the Muse is. I'm assuming the person asking the question probably owns one and uses one. I know about it, I've seen it, but since I have 19-channel EEG, which is way more sophisticated, that's what I use because I want to take a look at the entire brain. Now, that's not to say that they cannot use the Muse. If they have some way of seeing the raw EEG, the unfiltered brain waves with Muse, and they want to use BSP while doing it, I say go for it. Experiment, play around. But I haven't personally used it, no.
Okay. This is the question, probably the last question. If you have time, this is one of the last questions probably. How could we as a clinical practitioners make use of these tools for diagnostic treatment or research? Where we can learn that about the tools? Because there are also most of us here are clinical psychologists. So the most, what do you call, knowledgeable about these tools are doctors or psychiatrists in Indonesia. So as clinical practitioner also, I think we need also to learn about it. Where can we learn about it?
Well, There's different ways. Again, I do teach them, myself. I recently had a group of 6 brain spotting practitioners from the US, from the United States, who did an online course on heart rate variability with me. So if with your permission, I would like to say that if there's enough interest from people here, we can do 2 things. We can put together a group for a training, and I can guide you into what equipment you need to buy, which is affordable, and we can do the training online. It's very easy to do. So I can teach you how to do it. I can teach you how to do the assessment. I can teach you how to do the recordings and how to do the training and how you can do it with brain spotting. And again, if you contact me, I can give you resources where you can buy them, and I provide the training myself. So if there's enough interest for a group, we can do that. Or if somebody wants to do it one-on-one, I do it that way as well. I can do it one-on-one or have several people.
Let's talk about later, because there's a question, there's an inquiries there. So I'm going to ask it, and it's quite rare for here to get the knowledge of these tools. So I think it's very, very good opportunity if you can also taught us if you have the time. So this actually, there are 2 personal questions. Can I ask? It's personal from the person, probably from personal experience, so based on from your research, there's about temperature, body temperature. Based on your explanation, is it safe to say that people who have trauma usually have lower body temperature?
Yes, that's a very good question, and the correlation is there. With temperature, the mechanism is somewhat similar to that of GSR, galvanic skin response. But when our temperature, our hands are warm, it means that our blood vessels are open, they're dilated, which means it allows more blood flow and the hand gets warm. That's a good sign that the sympathetic branch is calmed down. But when we have trauma and we experience high sympathetic arousal, our blood vessels will constrict. So they close and the blood flow is reduced. And that's when we get cold hands. So cold hands mean, 1, you could have high sympathetic arousal. 2, constriction or suppression is the main means by which the client is trying to cope. People who suppress, people who do not talk, people who are introverts and tend not to verbally relay the information will have cold hands. Okay? And you can have severe PTSD as well. Now, you need to rule out medical things such as hypertension, hypotension, diabetes, hypoglycemia, glycemia, hypothyroidism, which are medical conditions that would cause your temperature to drop. If there's nothing medical and you have either of those 3, you have somebody who's suppressing and doesn't like to talk because they don't want to feel re-victimized. You have somebody with severe PTSD, and you have somebody who has high sympathetic arousal.
Okay, so actually at this COVID time, we scan our body quite a lot. So it can be like a sign for our clients also to check their body temperature.
Yeah, here in Colombia, specifically in Bogota, people who I'm doing brain spotting online with, they relate 2 things because of the whole confinement, the whole stress situation because of the virus. 1, they're eating a lot more, and they're gaining a lot of weight, and they're craving more sugars and carbohydrates. That's because of the high stress. You have tons of cortisol circulating through your body. That salad is going to look very awful. That donut is going to look awfully delicious. And the other reason is that carbohydrates and sugars give you an initial satiation sensation, so they calm you down. The problem is that you secrete more insulin and you're going to get hungry, you're going to want to go for more. So a lot of people are eating more and they report that they feel colder, that their bodies feel colder. So they get shivery and they get scared because they think they have the virus and they're running a fever. But in fact, it's the stress from their uncertainty that's wreaking havoc on their bodies. It's just because they're highly stressed out. I mean, and it's understandable. We are on fight or flight mode right now.
Yes, true. So this is, Is there any connection between trauma and epilepsy, if you have known from your research? Epilepsy? Yeah.
Well, it's funny you asked that, because just yesterday I was doing I was in a meeting with a former athlete from the U.S. who does suffer from epilepsy, and we've been doing some. Well, I haven't, but he's been undergoing neurofeedback, and he's been seizure free for about a year now. But one of the things we discovered is that he has the epileptic discharges in the EEG, and before that he had that beta pattern that I was showing you, some fast beta activity. And that fast beta activity correlates to inflammation, and that inflammation was coming from a trauma response in part. That's not to say that the trauma was the only cause of the inflammation, but he had a trauma response which was a part of it. When you have trauma, you have more inflammation, and when you have inflammation, what you do is you make the brain more prone or more susceptible to the discharges. So stress for him would be a trigger for the seizures. So he would go into seizures and convulsions, and we could see it in the EEG when it was recorded. So I'm not saying that there's a direct causation, but I'm saying that people with trauma would be more prone to experience seizures in epilepsy because of the ongoing HPA activation. So unless they get the cortisol under control, and unless they get the diet under control, unless they do an intervention like neurofeedback, which is proven time and again to be efficacious for epilepsy, well, things are not going to get better. And that's the case with this young man, because he's been doing neurofeedback for about a year now, and he's been seizure free for 1 year. His medication has been reduced about 75%. But he also went into a plant-based diet. So he changed his nutrition dramatically. And we've been able to see it in the EEG. We've seen the reduction in the beta pattern, which means there's a reduction in the inflammation. And it is the combination of both elements that have been helping him. And he's a client of Paige Roberts, whom you might know. And Paige has been doing Brainspotting and continues to do Brainspotting sessions with him. So again, integration to me is the key. But yes, if you're traumatized and you have chronic stress, you're more prone to experience seizures, and they're more prone to be, they're bound to be more intense and frequent as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we already 10 minutes past the time. So
I have more time if there's more questions. I have 5-10 more minutes. So, but if
5-10 more minutes,
I know some of you might be tired. Yeah, no problem.
Well, kalau ada yang mau bertanya langsung, silakan buka mic juga nggak apa-apa. If you want to, atau lewat chat. I'm giving the opportunity to open mic if there are any question. Apakah ada pertanyaan? Or if not, I will ask from here. Is there any research that show that cortisols kill neuron?
Yes, there's plenty of that. If you do Google Scholar search for cortisol and cell death, or chronic stress and cell death, you can go to Google Scholar or any of the search engines that are specifically designed to find published articles. You will find tons of that. Yes. Robert Sapolsky, who's a biologist from the University of Stanford in California, he wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And there's also a YouTube documentary with the same name. Well, no, actually the YouTube documentary is called Stress Portrait of a Killer. If you search for Stress Portrait of a Killer and you look for Robert Sapolsky's research, he talks a lot about what cortisol and chronic stress does to the brain. So he probably is the main source of that. He's done tons of research on stress. Buy the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a lot of fun to read. And it will provide you with a wealth of information on stress and what it does to the brain as well. And you can search him on YouTube. He's Robert Sapolsky, Stanford University. And he recently wrote a book called Behave, which is very interesting as well. And it's a book about human behavior from the anthropological perspective, psychological perspective, hormonal perspective, neurotransmitter perspective. So to begin with, I would suggest looking up Sapolsky, and he will provide you, and you will find tons of written research on cortisol and brain cell death and the nasty things that it does.
Thank you. So there's a question about from I think he's a doctor. Can you diagnose Thalamo cortical dysregulation from EEG? Thalamo cortical dysregulation.
Yeah, you can. Well, diagnosis is not something that we do. Diagnosis is something a neurologist would do. I'm a psychologist, and if I look at it, I will be able to identify because I'm trained for it. But I would have the neurologist or the neurosurgeon diagnose it. Okay, but you can see thalamocortical dysrhythmia from looking at the EEG, and you can look at whether that's affecting nesting and coupling as well. The EEG provides very useful information about the functioning of the brain. The difference between EEG, MRI, or CAT scans is that the MRI or the CAT scan will show you structural will evaluate the structure of the brain. So we'll look for structural or physical changes in the brain. Sometimes I have clients with traumatic brain injuries or concussions who are feeling depressed or have memory problems or really aggressive, and they come to do a brain map, and they tell me, I did an MRI and everything was fine, and did a CAT scan and everything was fine. I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And what I explained to them is that the MRI or the CAT scan didn't find anything from a physical perspective, which is good. You don't have a strong concussion, you don't have an injury, you don't have a tumor, that's good. But EEG will show functional changes in the brain. It's about function. So while physically your brain may be fine, functionally is not fine. And that's what we look at with the EEG. So the EEG provides us a more in-depth, whereas the MRI or the CAT scan don't. Now, sometimes I see EEG patterns that worry me. And I think, well, this looks like it could be a tumor. This looks like it could be a lesion. It could be a cyst in the brain, but I cannot tell that from the EEG. So what I do is I suggest the person gets an MRI or a CAT scan to rule something out. Doing both is usually better, but if you want to go more in depth, EEG and QEEG is more profound. And you can see the thalamocortical dysrhythmia, and you can see where it's happening in the brain as well.
Okay, so Mbak Pam, siap buka? There's someone who wants to ask question.
Sure.
Mbak Pamela.
Cannot speak? Okay. Santiago, thank you for your time. I've learned that inhaling and exhaling correlates to different autonomic nervous system, right? Which one with parasympathetic and the other with sympathetic nervous system, yes? Well, what is the implication of this kind of thing to regulate our breathing when we feel something, namely when we fear or we feel anxious or we feel too much excited? I mean, can we teach our client to take like a long exhaling more than inhale, or vice versa when we feel something?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for your question, Pamela. Is a very good question. First, we need to understand that we have an ideal breathing rate, which is between 5 and 7 breaths per minute. So all human beings would benefit of doing minimum of 5 breaths per minute to 7 breaths per minute. On average, the average adult, the average human around the world has a breathing rate of about 15 breaths per minute, which is, it's high, it's fast. And usually it's shallow and it's fast. And what that does, it activates your sympathetic branch. Okay, so most adults around the world are operating and functioning on a daily basis with a highly activated sympathetic branch. Now, when we inhale, we activate the sympathetic branch, and when we exhale, we activate the parasympathetic branch. Let's think about it as driving a car. You have the gas and you have the brake. Okay, when you are in sympathetic arousal, you're stepping on the gas and you're not stopping. If you're driving a car and you don't step on the brake, you're gonna crash sooner or later. Okay, so with people who are stepping on the gas, who have a lot of sympathetic arousal, they crash, they get sick, mentally and physically, they don't sleep well, they're anxious, they get autoimmune disorders, all sorts of things. But there are people who get on the car, step on the brake, and don't let go. And these are your parasympathetic activated folks. So, your chronic fatigue, dissociation, helplessness, hopelessness, low motivation. So when you drive a car, you want to accelerate when needed and you want to step on the brake when needed, right? And that's what we call autonomic balance. We want to balance the gas and we balance the brake, meaning we want to balance sympathetic and parasympathetic. And we do that with the breathing. We inhale, step on the gas. We exhale, step on the brake. And we are balancing the autonomic balance, the autonomic nervous system, and that's called autonomic balance. In other words, that translates to happiness, to joy, contentment, peace of mind. Okay, the technical word is autonomic balance. People will describe it as those things. So the process of breathing, it's about activating your sympathetic branch and your parasympathetic branch. The length of the exhalation, the length of the breathing, it's usually recommended that the exhaling, it's a little longer than the inhaling, because you want to allow more time to the parasympathetic branch to act. So your breathing is a little shorter, you're inhaling, you're breathing in, it's a little shorter, your exhaling is a little longer. And you do that in an organized way. When you are doing that, you're achieving what's called coherence. And coherence is that you're synchronizing your breathing with your heart rate, with your autonomic nervous system. So everything goes in sync. They're all organized at the same time. And that is going, among other regions of the brain, one of the main regions that's going to benefit from that is the amygdala. If you have an overactive amygdala, it's because you have an overactive sympathetic branch. So you're either overbreathing or you're hyperventilating. As you go into autonomic balance, the amygdala cools down and you get more flow into your frontal cortex. The amygdala is what makes you react in fight or flight. So it's your instinctive reacting. The clients who react angrily, aggressively, impulsively is because they have sympathetic dominance and they have the amygdala, it's overactive. The frontal lobe is not getting a lot of perfusion, a lot of blood flow. As you organize heart rhythmicity, the amygdala cools down and you get more blood flow into the frontal cortex. And that's the aha moment for the client. That's when the client says, oh, I get it. So I don't need to beat somebody up to get the point across. I can talk to them. I don't need to cut, if somebody cuts me off when I'm driving, I don't need to chase them down for miles and try to drive them off the road. I can just move on. So when we calm down the amygdala and we engage the frontal cortex, by that process, the person understands that there's another way of behaving. But that wasn't happening because of that. And that's because somebody was asking about neuroplasticity. That's what neuroplasticity does. It deactivates the areas of the brain that are not working properly, that are overactivated, and it creates new wiring in those areas of the brain that we want to function optimally. Okay, neuroplasticity is about functional cognitivity. So it's not so much about having a lot of neurons, it's about having the right neurons communicating right with each other. There's a view in which the more neurons we have, the better, and that's to an extent, But we don't necessarily have to have a bunch of neurons, because if they're not, if they're not talking to each other, it doesn't do any good. But if we have the right amount of connectivity and that connectivity is functional, then we have neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is about creating new connections in the brain that help those networks function more optimally. So whereas before I was angry at the world and I was really furious and I was just hating everybody, now I have new connections that allow me to love, to understand, to comprehend, to gain control. That's what neuroplasticity does. It's creating new connections in the brain and creating functional connectivity. That's the key. And we do that with brain spotting. I believe brain spotting facilitates neuroplasticity. We just need the evidence for that. Just like neurofeedback does, just like biofeedback does. I just think that when we integrate them, it works much more profoundly. But that's just my take on things.
Okay, I think it's time. Sorry, time. So, is it possible for one more question, or it's?
Yeah, like I said, it's. I know it's late for you guys. It's really early for us here. So.
Just one more question.
Sure.
I'm going to mix two questions together. Have you experienced spotting with autism or brain spotting and autism with addiction?
I have not. Interestingly enough, brain spotting has good evidence. Neurofeedback has good evidence for autism, but I don't get consulted for it at all. I don't know why. I don't know if people look for other options. It's not that I run away from it, but I have never done neurofeedback or brain spotting with autism. I have done neurofeedback for addictions. I haven't had the chance to test brain spotting with addictions, and I would like to at some point use the crocodile setup from Robbie in Australia, which I understand is wonderful. But at this point, sadly, I have to say that I haven't tried it. I would love to see what working with the addicted brain and brain spotting would do. So at some point, I'd like somebody to record somebody who's addicted and they're doing brain spotting with the crocodile setup. That would be very interesting to watch.
Okay, then that would be the last question. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. So everyone, can we have can we take a picture before we end the session, Santiago?
Yeah, sure, of course.
So please open your video, everyone. And you can speak right now, but let's take a picture first. And thank you for today. And let's take a picture. So Mona, Ina, are you ready?
Yeah, ready.
Okay, smile, 1, 2, 3.
We're gonna have a six page. Okay, so it's 6 time.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. We start now. Can we start again, Adit? Can you say it 1, 2, 3?
Okay. Let's start. 1, 2, 3. Yay! Stay smiling.
Okay. The second one.
Second page. Still smiling. 1, 2, 3. We don't know where page we are.
And the third one.
Page 3. Yay!
Fourth one.
Page 4. Yay!
5. And 6, done.
And okay, so thank you very much. You can open your mic by yourself and say thank you directly to Santiago.
Thank you.
Thank you, Santiago.
Santiago. So much, Santiago.
Thank you. Thank you, Mbak Ine. Thank you, Mas Adit.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you for staying until late at night. Oh, ada Itis.
Thank you for the extra time for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Ada Itin. Hi.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a good weekend, and
Thank you,
contact me if you
Santi.
need anything.
Thank you. Same
Thank
to you.
you.
And have a nice weekend for all of you. Thank you, Santi, for this morning. And
Thank
this
you,
is
guys.
very early in the morning for you. So let's please let's wait for the video. And you are open to contact Santi via Instagram or any info at the back of the presentation. So see you at next meeting. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Selamat Eid.
Bye bye. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Terima kasih Bu Woro. Bu Woro masih ada nggak ya? Semoga masih ada Bu Woro. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
So Santi, I think I'm going to end the room. So if we need to chat, we can continue in another platform. Is it okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
See you.
that's fine.
Okay, I will. Or you want to talk for? We will send you another Zoom link
Session.
after this.
Oh, but just end.
Yeah. that's
Okay.
good.
Bye bye, Itim.
Or
Okay.
I can call you through Messenger as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we can talk
Right.
by messengers. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll call you in
bye-bye.
a few minutes.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Have a nice night. Have a nice weekend. Thank you.